Hi, everybody, and welcome back to our second course in Intermediate Accounting. The first chapter in the second course is Chapter 13, titled Long-Term Liabilities. Our learning objectives from this chapter, we're going to look at describing the nature of bonds and indicate how we account for bond issuances. We'll take a look at describing the accounting for the extinguishment, love that academic term, that would be paying back the debt. And then under number 3 here, we'll explain the accounting for long-term notes payable. And lastly, we'll indicate how to present and analyze long-term debt. So as we preview Chapter 13, first is our bonds payable. We'll look at issuing them, the types of bonds, valuing and accounting for them, and using the effective interest method. In the case of the effective interest method, some of you may have not had that in the past. In this course, we will use that extensively, so you'll want to make sure you know how to do that. Okay, then how do we extinguish the debt? We have our reacquisition price. Sometimes we purchase back our bonds or debt before their intended maturity date. And then how do we refund them, etc. As we transition to long-term notes payable, here we have notes issued at face value, notes that aren't issued at face value, other special situations, and finally, mortgage notes payable. I always like to let my students know that most likely at some point in your life you're going to be buying a home. And knowing how mortgages work will help you personally as well as professionally. Okay, then we'll look at how we report and analyze liability. What is that fair value option? And then how we present and analyze those liabilities. Okay, let's get into the meat of the chapter. Here we're describing the nature of the bonds and indicating how we issue those bonds. In this little diagram here, they're illustrating a note payable. And here you're buying a loan. You go down to the bank and you get a loan for $1 million, and the company signs an agreement with the bank, and away you go. Bonds normally are issued in $1,000 increments. So $1,000 increments can appeal to a larger group of people who can afford to buy a $1,000 bond. And sometimes a lender might kick in for half of it, as shown here, but some other investors may kick in the remainder. So collectively here, they have loaned the company $2 million in bonds. Okay, notes payable. When a single lender or investor loans money to a company, a note payable is created. That is a formal legal document that specifies important features of that note. The amount, the maturity, the date, and the rate of the interest to be paid are almost always features of that note payable. Bonds payable, a little different, but similar. A bond is a type of note payable in which the amount is divided into smaller pieces. At least in my experience, almost always issued in $1,000 increments. With more units, then, the company can issue bonds to more investors and raise more money as compared to a single note payable to a single lender or investor. Now, as we look at issuing these bonds, a bond contract is known as bond indentures. Key terminology here. It represents a promise to pay a sum of money at a designated maturity date, plus periodic interest at a specified rate on the maturity amount, the face value. Face value is that which is written on the bond. You get a paper certificate, typically for $1,000 face value. And then the interest payments are usually made semi-annually. Sometimes for this chapter, you will see that they make annual payments just to keep it simple to illustrate the concept. But interest payments are usually made semi-annually. And then these bonds are used when the amount of capital needed is too large for one lender to supply. We have a variety of different kinds of bonds. Secured bonds, those are bonds that are backed up by some sort of collateral. And mortgage bonds are secured by a claim on real estate. Collateral trust bonds are secured by stock and bonds of other corporations. So our unsecured bonds are bonds that are not backed by collateral and are unsecured. A debenture bond is unsecured. A junk bond is unsecured and also very risky, and therefore must pay a very high interest rate to get investors to buy them. The term of the bonds that mature on a single date, that's a term bond. A serial bond, that matures in installments. So serial bonds are not normally used in the corporate world. They're used in the government, in the government accounting, and these are frequently used by schools, municipalities, local taxing authorities, etc. A callable bond is a bond that gives the issuer the right to call and redeem the bonds before they mature. That's a type of bond that benefits the corporation, not the investor. A convertible bond, on the other hand, that can be converted into other securities, usually common stock, of the corporation for a specified time after issuance. And that's a nice type of bond that benefits the investor. And then we have deep discount or even zero interest debentures, and those are sold at substantial discounts that provide the investors total interest payoff at maturity. We have revenue bonds. Now, those are, again, normally done by governmental bodies, used to pay for such things as airports and schools and toll roads and that kind of thing. Income bonds are bonds that pay no interest unless the issuing company is profitable. Somewhat rare, but nevertheless a type of bond. Okay, valuing and accounting for bonds payable. Here, the issuance and marketing of bonds does not happen overnight. It takes several weeks and sometimes months before that can get completed. The issuing company, the corporation, arranges for underwriters that will help market and sell the bonds. My experience has been with those underwriters in New York, the large ones. The company then, under number 2 here, the company obtains Securities and Exchange Commission's approval on the bond issue. They undergo audits, and finally a prospectus is issued. And that's a document that describes the features of the bond and the related financial information. Then the company has the bond certificates printed, and out they go for sale. The selling price of a bond, stated coupon or nominal rate. Now, the selling price of a bond is impacted by several factors, such as supply and demand of buyers and sellers, relative risk, market condition, state of the economy. It's important that you understand the two interest rates. The stated rate, that's the coupon or nominal rate. That's the interest rate written in terms of the bond indenture. That's what's written on the bond. The bond issuer sets this rate, which represents the amount of interest that's actually going to be paid. Now, in the old days, before my days, if you bought a bond, they gave you a little book of coupons. And then you would send the coupon in, mail it, snail mail it into the corporation, and the corporation would mail back your interest, bond interest. But that is long ago, far away, been discontinued. It's all electronic these days. But the name coupon or rate still exists, and the nominal rate. But mostly in this textbook, we'll be using the term stated rate, and that's what's written on the face of the bond. Now, the market rate, or effective rate, or effective yield, that's the prevailing interest rate in the investing markets for bonds with similar characteristics. It's driven by many factors, including the risk of the company, maybe government policy, what the Fed is doing, the central bank, and the state of the economy. That interest rate fluctuates daily, up or down, over time. Now, if the market rate here is greater than the stated rate here, that means the bonds will sell at a discount. You're not going to pay the $1,000 when you're expecting a 5% rate and the bond only pays 4%. On the other hand, if you're expecting 3% and the bond's paying 4%, then that bond will sell at a premium. And we'll see how to calculate that in a few minutes. Okay, pricing of the bond. The selling price of the bond is determined by calculating the present value of its expected future cash flows. Very important concept. The cash flows consist of 1, interest payments over the bond term calculated at the stated rate, and 2, the principal or face value that will be paid at the maturity date. So, here is an illustration of how we do that. Realtek, a developer of augmented reality software, issues $100,000 in bonds due in 5 years with a 9% interest payable annually at year end. At the time of issue, the market rate for such bonds is 11%. What is the price of the bond? That is the present value of the bond issue. So we know this bond is going to sell at a discount. So here's the example. Now, we base the payments on what's written on the bond. So that was 9% times 100,000, which is 9,000 a year. Okay, and here it is here. Each of those, and then we go into the present value table and pick up this rate for 11% prevailing rate over 5 years. That gives me 33,000. And then at the 5th year, we pick up the present value of an amount from table 5.2, and that gives me 59,345. And that equals 92,608. That difference is 73.9190. That's the discount. Okay, that looks like a good place to end this video. And when we return, we'll take a look at discussing bonds in more depth. Until that time, Bye for now.